Well, we're going to start a brand new series. We're going to do this for the next 4 weeks for the month of November. And it's maybe an obvious title, but we're simply calling it Giving Thanks. Now, this is not just about the holiday that is coming up this month, but if you're like me, I really look forward to the Thanksgiving holiday. I am thankful for the meal that will be prepared around the Thanksgiving table. I'm thankful for the family that I'll gather with. Um, all of us have different relationships with our family, right? We joke sometimes like, you love them, but you might not want to go on vacation with them, right? Is that true for some of us? But I really enjoy the opportunity to connect around a table, around sharing a feast. One of the things that I miss as some of our family members have gone on to be with the Lord is some of the special dishes that certain people were famous for. I know for most families, turkey is the traditional meat, and we usually had turkey. But when my grandfather was alive, we also always had venison. And I don't know about you, but growing up in Southern Illinois, being a deer hunter, like that was special. I just kind of felt like not every Thanksgiving table has this, but mine does, and it's pretty good. Now, this might gross some of you out, but I also had a great aunt who fixed stuffing every year, which is another Thanksgiving staple, right? But she always fixed two different kinds. And she would make about an hour and a half drive to a seafood place. And so she would fix traditional stuffing and then she would fix oyster stuffing made with the freshest oysters that you can buy living this far away from the ocean. Um, and it became a long running joke because we would never know which one was which, right? Even though she made them in the same pot, like we should have known, but it was just every Thanksgiving. Okay, Aunt Dar, which one is the oyster? It's the one in the silver pot. So I love those traditions. I'm grateful for those experiences, right? And we're at a stage now where even as some of those family members have gone on to be with Jesus, we're trying to create new traditions with our kids. Um, and they've really been looking forward to. We do always go to Southern Illinois still for the Thanksgiving holiday as well as Christmas. Well, one of the things that I want to begin to talk about today in this series or this idea of giving thanks is this week we're going to look at giving thanks to the Lord. Now, you might think, well, again, that's kind of obvious. We should always be thankful. We know the scripture tells us that we enter his gates with thanksgiving in our hearts. We enter his courts with praise. We're familiar with those things. But one of the things that I want to begin to dial into is that we're giving thanks to the Lord, and I've subtitled, He is the giver of all things. And some of this we touched on in our last series, but we're going to look at a little bit different angle today. But we're giving thanks to God. And I want to analogize this, if you will, with this idea of communication. Whenever you communicate to somebody, and we all understand this pretty intuitively, but I just want to use it to paint a picture. If I say something to you, the communication process is both what I'm speaking and what you're hearing, right? And we know we don't always do that well. Sometimes the other person may not hear what you're saying, right? So there's this idea of both giving and receiving. And in a good communication, it's the same message, right? In our giving thanks to God, we need to begin to understand that He is receiving it. And so this is a two-way interaction. Giving thanks to the Lord is not just me listing the things that I'm grateful for. I'm actually giving something to Him, and it's more than just communication, but He's also receiving it and then doing something with it. And so when the scripture talks about how we enter through thanksgiving, that's not a one-way interaction where I have this list of things and here, God, here's all the things I'm grateful for. No, there's actually a process that begins to happen. As I give my thanks to the Lord, He reflects goodness back to me. And I actually can become changed. This is a weird dynamic, and we're gonna unpack this and dial this up in a few different ways. But I just want to start with this baseline. Like that process of giving thanks to the Lord does change me. if it's honest, if we allow him to meet us in that, that process can actually change my perspective. It can actually have a transforming effect on my life. Not always on my circumstances, but even if the circumstances aren't transformed, my perspective of them can. All right, so let's go to Mark chapter 12. We're going to look at one quick verse, and then we're going to begin to pull some threads. Mark chapter 12, verse 33. This whole little section here, Jesus has been teaching on what's often referred to as the Great Commandment. And in 29, he listed the most important, this one's not going to be on the screen for you, but he says in 29, the most important commandment is this. Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only Lord. So he's establishing his role. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. 31, the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. These things are often paired up with the Great Commission we talked about, where Jesus gives final instructions, and then if he points as this is the Great Commandment, we sort of can have these two things together to have basic instructions, right? Basic marching orders of what we're supposed to do. Well, as this conversation goes on between Jesus and the religious teachers, in verse 33 we read this, because this is one of the teachers of the religious law replying. In verse 33 he says, and I know that it is important to love him with all my heart and all my understanding and all my strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. So he's recognizing, I know that commandment is important. Yes, I recognize that. And then he goes on to say, this is more important than to offer all of the burnt offerings and sacrifices required in the law. And I think we just need to dwell on that for a minute. This is more important than to offer all of the burnt offerings and sacrifices that are required in the law. See, we can turn Thanksgiving into a religious duty. We can turn our gratitude into checking the boxes. I just want to make sure, I've said thank you to Jesus, but where is our heart? And you've heard me use this phrase before. Sometimes we'll pause in a moment as we're inviting the Spirit, and I'll say something along the lines of, let's turn the affection of our heart towards God. And that's what we're talking about. When we're talking about giving thanks to the Lord, we're not talking about giving lip service to a list of thankful things. We're talking about giving him something out of our heart to express what we really feel, what is really in us. And it says that that's actually more important. So that we could also put this lined up next to or parallel to the passage we looked at before, where Jesus says to the woman that the time is coming when you won't worship on this mountain, but those who he's seeking will worship in spirit and in truth. It's that same concept. It's a shift from ceremonial law to spiritual and relational worship. The same thing is true here as it comes to Thanksgiving. Jesus doesn't need to just hear a list, but he's looking for the affections of our hearts. That's what he's asking us for. Okay, so that's what we're trying to establish and where we're going, but let's back up and look at some things to help us dig into this a little bit further. I'm going to start with this statement. God is the ultimate and original creator. Now, again, I don't have to build some big foundation. I think that most of us in this room and online, that would be an accepted fact, that God is both the ultimate and the original creator. But we need to have that in view. Let's look at John 1. John 1, in the first couple of verses, says, in the beginning, the Word, who we know is Jesus, already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he existed in the beginning with God. Verse 3, he says, God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. And so all created things that we experience, everything in the earth, all things were created through him. He's the original creator. Now, I think we could spend some time, and maybe you would do this on your own, to just stop and dwell on the incredible amount of creativity. Like you can marvel. I mean, I encounter things regularly. Just take technology, for example. The things that are possible now that weren't possible even 5, 10, 15 years ago. Like the rapid advancement of, and you might not think of that as creativity, but it's like someone had to have the idea, someone had to do the research or experiment and fail. And if I can marvel at that level of creativity that exists within humanity, think all of that is based off of the creativity of God. Like he created the very structure that exists in our bodies, the way the molecules are put together, the way things vibrate and move and be. Like he's the originator of all of that. I didn't put these pictures up on the screen because I don't want to make everything about me and my life, but I just was so fascinated. My parents are on a trip right now. Today they're in the Grand Canyon, but yesterday they were at a place called the Antelope Canyon, and there were these slot canyons. And if you've ever been in a place like that, it's just absolutely stunningly beautiful. It's rock, but it almost looks like sand, and the layers and the lines and just the formations. It's like it just seems like beyond. Like I couldn't even create or imagine such beauty, and yet the earth is covered with these things because God not only is ultimately good, he's ultimately creative. Like it emanates from him, and every ability that we have to express creativity, to look at aspects of design and beauty, these all originate from God. He created everything. Going on in verse 4, where we're at here, we're still in John 1. It says, the Word gave life to everything that was created. So he doesn't just create inanimate things like we think about, but he actually gives life. And we could read into that, he is the source of life, right? So he's not just creating things to be used, he is giving it life. He is giving us life. And everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. Our life is not our own. It's possible because God is the source of life. And so here's the whole reason I'm laying this baseline, right? If all of that is true, and I believe that it is, we as a church say that, the Bible is our normative center for our rule of faith and practice. In other words, we believe that it's good and it's reliable and it's accurate. I think at a very basic level, that's a great place to be thankful, to start with. I'm so grateful, not just that God exists or that I've had some blessings, but that he is ultimately so good, that he's creative, that he created and designed us with the ability to appreciate beautiful and well-designed things. Many of you know some of my history. Prior to coming full-time into vocational ministry, I supported myself as an antique furniture upholsterer, which is a skill and a passion that I still have. But one of the things that I loved about that was that you get to take once beautiful things and bring them back to life and usefulness. Things that, in their original design took an incredible amount of craftsmanship and detailed design decisions. And yet, as all things do, as our beautifully designed bodies also do, things wear out over time. Things get broken, and they just don't look like they once did. I don't know what to do about that for our physical bodies, but if you give me an antique chair, I can bring it back to life. I can update it. I can change it to make it both beautiful and useful. Okay? Secondly, God gives out of his love for us. So he created all things. He made all things good and beautiful, and he was pleased with them and therefore our pleasure. And then he also gives out of his love for us. See, we are his pinnacle creation. Like the thing that he's the most proud of is you. You are the apple of his eye. The way he knit you together, and I'll be honest, I don't always feel that way. Like I don't feel like, our pastor, Happy Layman at Champaign used to say, I'm God's favorite, and so are you. Well, I don't always feel like I'm God's favorite. I don't always feel like, I'm made just right. But God sees you that way. He sees the way that he knit you together and the way that he designed you, and he says, it's good. I like what I made there. Right? And out of his love for us, because he creates us, but he loves us. He loves everything about us. In John 3:16, one of the most popular verses in the Bible, we have this phrase. It said, "This is how God loved the world. He gave." Excuse me. Now we could quote the rest of that passage, but the point is, out of his love, he gave. Like that's the whole basis for what God gives, right? We could also tag Romans 5:8 says, "But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners." See, God loved us so much that rather than choosing to judge us for the choices we made and the thing we had become, he said, "No, my love is greater. My mercy is going to triumph over my judgment, and I'm going to make a way because those are my kids. I made them. I love them, and I'm going to make things right again. I'm going to set things to right." And that's why he gave his son. That's why he sent Jesus. Right? So out of God's great love for us, he gives. And we could also extend this out to the gifts that he gives us. It's not just that he gives us the ability to come into relationship with him. He freely gives us gifts. He gives us blessing. He gives us favor. Maybe not always the one I'm asking for at the moment, right? Like, because he's actually better at it than I am. But God gives to us out of his great love. We reflect our thanks to God or our thankfulness to God in the way that we share it with others. So we've established that God is ultimately good. Everything about him is good and everything he created is good. We've established that he gives to us good gifts, good things out of his great love for us. And as a result of that, we have thankfulness. We can honestly say, "God, I'm thankful. You've been so good to me. I didn't deserve it, but yet you've fathered me well. You've given me good gifts. You've given me you can talk about the tangible things. In my case, he's given me beautiful, intelligent children. He's given me a beautiful place to live. All of these gifts that I walk in every day in my life came from God. And we reflect our gratefulness to that in the way that we share with others. 1 John, not the Gospel of John, but 1 John says, we love each other because he first loved us. Again, it goes back to God is the source. Our ability to love other people, and we know, I didn't pull up the reference, but it's how will they know that we're Christians? Because we love one another. And there's evidence of that. But how is that made possible? It's made possible because he loved us first. See, I don't have the ability to love you outside of what God has deposited in my life. And we need to recognize that. We love each other because he first loved us. Let's go to Acts, and we're going to begin to circle this up. Acts chapter 17. We're just going to look at a couple of verses here. Acts chapter 17, 27 and the first part of 28. We're going to unpack this a little bit and then begin to wrap this up. His purpose, it says, was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him. And this, I find this next phrase so interesting. Though he is not far from any one of us. Can we just, we've talked about the reality that Jesus is he's never further away than the end of the length of your arm, like your reach. He's never further away than that. We can feel like he is, right? Like we may not always feel his presence in certain ways, but he's not far from us. And then it says in the first part of 28, for in him we live and move and exist. Some translations say we breathe. Like it's pointing back to that reality that the very essence of our life is intimately connected to God. He is close. He is real. And we draw our very source of life directly from him. And that is to affect and inform what we do, how we interact with other people. I want to go back to the scripture that we read at the beginning, Mark 12:33, and then says, I know that it is important. So as I'm speaking to you this morning, you know that these things are important. I'm not telling you something you don't know. And I truly believe that for most, if not all of us in this room, it is your desire to love him with all your heart, to love him with all your understanding and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. I believe you're the kind of people that have in your heart a desire to do that. But we need to remember that how we do it and how we're motivated is just as important as our actions. And my request of the Lord this morning is, this might be a weird way to word it. I would ask the Lord, and you can ask him in your own way, Lord, would you give me the ability to give you thanks? Because I can't do any of it on my own. I just can't. I need him. I need his life. I need his transformative touch to even be able not only to give him thanks, but just to breathe and move and exist. And can I become more aware of how real that is? And if I can become more aware of how real that is, I am convinced that thankfulness will be an organic result. This is why we emphasize so much here an experience of God. Now you can take that out of context, and we have been accused of being overly experiential. And you could attach to that, well, it's all about emotions or hype. And I would reject that. I would say that we need to have a real experience of God. Now, I'm not for emotional hype, right? It's not about the feelings. It's about the reality that if God is real, I can really have an experience of him in a way that it affects my life. It changes things. It empowers me. And we have this saying, often when we're talking about just planning things and stuff here in the church, it's easy to celebrate when you have something to celebrate, right? Like you don't have to fake celebration when something has happened that you can celebrate. The same is true for us as Christians. We can easily forget what we have to be thankful for, but if we can get in touch with the reality of how good God is, and that is not just about knowing up here, it's about experiencing it here. As we have an experience of his transformative love, and all of a sudden, we're saying things like, God, you're so good, and then maybe it just hits you. Oh, God, you are so good. In that experience of him, in that deep knowing of him, in that intimate place of relationship, there will be nothing but thankfulness. I have never pressed in to the depths of God's presence and come away disappointed or come away with anything other than, oh, God, you're so good. Because I know me. I know what I have done. I know, and yet somehow that doesn't put him off. And you know the reason why? Because he created it. And not only did he create us, he sees what we can become. And he is in the process of taking us there. And I'm right back to where I started. God, I'm so thankful for your transformative presence. That as I spend time with you, you actually change me. And I don't always like it. It's not always comfortable. I'll be brutally honest. If you follow God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, it is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done. Nothing worth pursuing is going to come without a cost. It might cost you your pride. It might cost you a friendship. It might cost you all sorts of different things. But just as we read in that story about the man who went and sold everything to get that pearl of great price, it is worth paying that cost. It's worth it because it's the only thing that's real, right? What I can accomplish in terms of material things and the ways of the world is limited. And it's and in some ways it's all just quick passing. The kingdom is what's really real. And at the end of the day, I wasn't going to go here, but I'm just going to, for just a second. No matter what happens on Tuesday, the kingdom is still preeminent. And I don't care which side of the aisle you're on, what you're thinking. I mean, I care, but I'm saying the kingdom is still preeminent. There's no result that's going to knock Jesus off of his throne. Now, each of you might have a preferred result, and I'm okay with that. I really am. But no matter what happens, Jesus is still on his throne. And he's not surprised. He's not set back. The kingdom will still keep moving forward. And if we can press in, again, like, I don't know what's going to happen. We might end up being really, really disappointed in the results. And yet, I could stop in that moment and say, God, I'm so thankful that your kingdom is not of this world. That you have promised that no matter what happens, you'll be with me. That you've promised to go with me, that you've promised that your kingdom will keep moving forward, and that you've put your spirit in me. And, just like we were talking about earlier, whether the church operates in freedom or persecution, the kingdom can thrive. I would argue quietly, the church might thrive better under persecution than freedom. I'm just being honest, if we look at our track record, if we look at history, the kingdom might actually go forward better under persecution than under freedom. Ooh. Okay, now that I've opened that can of worms, I'm going to try to put the lid back on and slide it over there. Okay? Because we're not going to unpack all of that this morning. My encouragement or my exhortation to you today is to continue on this journey of pressing in. And can I just say this? Let's develop raw, honest vulnerability with God. Can we come to God in a quiet, solitary place and be this honest? God, I don't feel like I have much to be thankful for. And I know that's not true. But can we say things like that to God? I think he has expressed to me he's okay with that. He's not that fragile. But in that place of being honest and open, can we say, but God, I want to. I want to experience more of your goodness. I want to be able to keep walking despite what it seems like is coming against me, despite the anxiety that hangs thick in the air in our community at times. So, God, would you help me be thankful?